Jonathan Pierce. Sharp suit, fast life, Boston skyline at his back. He runs a billion-dollar financial firm, yet there's always been something missing. One cold afternoon, as he walks past a shoeshine boy on the sidewalk, something strange happens. The boy presses an old, rusted watch into Jonathan's hand and says, "I think this belongs to you." Jonathan freezes. That watch isn't just any watch. It was his father's, lost 10 years ago. But how did this boy find it, and why does he have the same last name? As questions swirl and memories stir, Jonathan is pulled into a mystery that will challenge his past and reshape his future. He'll face corporate betrayal, a woman from his past, and 2 children who may carry more than just his name. In a world where power often means silence, can Jonathan find the courage to speak his truth and finally become the father he never imagined he'd be? Stay with us for a story that proves time may pass, but love can return. Subscribe now for more stories that touch the heart and stay with you forever. The air was sharp that afternoon in downtown Boston, the kind of cold that seeped through tailored coats and clung to bone. Jonathan Pierce stepped out of his office building, adjusting the cuffs of his charcoal overcoat as he descended the granite steps. He was a man who moved with purpose. Every step, every glance, calculated. A titan in finance. A man people whispered about in the elevators, but rarely approached. He didn't usually walk, but today had been long. A drawn-out board meeting, numbers that didn't add up, and a gnawing sense that something invisible, was slipping through his fingers. As he turned the corner past the plaza, a voice cut through the hum of city noise. "Sir? Hey, sir!" He paused, looked down. A boy, no older than 10, stood there, his sneakers soaked through, a ragged shoeshine kit slung over one shoulder. His cheeks were flushed, and his fingers trembled slightly as he held something out. It was a watch. Scratched, old, and caked in dust, but unmistakable. Jonathan stared at it, stunned. "I think it's yours," the boy said quietly. "I found it in a box near the river. Something told me to give it to you." Jonathan took a slow step forward. His fingers reached out, almost hesitant, as he took the object from the boy's hand. His breath caught. On the back of the timepiece were 5 engraved words, faded, but still clear. "To my son, J.P. Sr." The world around him seemed to freeze. This was his watch, the one his father gave him before he passed, the one he lost in the Florida over a decade ago, the one he thought was gone forever. "How did you—" Jonathan's voice cracked, something he hadn't allowed in years. "I don't know," the boy shrugged. "It just felt important." Jonathan blinked, trying to find his voice again. "What's your name, kid?" "Tyler," he said. "Tyler Pierce." That name, Pierce, hit him like a punch to the chest. Jonathan crouched slowly, eye level with the boy now. "Pierce? Your last name is Pierce?" "Yeah," Tyler nodded. "That's what's on my school forms. My mom says it's the only thing my real dad left us." Jonathan's hands tightened around the watch. His voice lowered. "Where's your mom now?" Tyler pointed down the block. "She's at home. She's been sick. I try to help out. Me and my brother take turns shining shoes." "You have a brother? Twin? Noah? He's better with people. I just fix things, like watches." Jonathan's gaze lingered on the boy, so much unsaid behind those brave little eyes. The watch ticked faintly in his hand, a ghost of a past he'd tried to bury. "Would you take me to your mom?" he asked gently. Tyler hesitated. "Only if you promise not to yell. She's already got enough to worry about." "I promise," Jonathan said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "No yelling." As they walked down the street, the city's noise seemed to quiet. Jonathan's thoughts raced. The watch, The name, the boy, could it really be? And if so, why hadn't she told him? The door they stopped at was old, paint peeling, one hinge crooked. Tyler knocked twice. From inside, a tired voice called out, "Tyler, you okay?" "Yeah, Mom, I brought someone." Jonathan stepped in slowly. The apartment was small, warm despite the chipped walls and flickering light. A woman sat on the couch, wrapped in a faded blanket. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. "Emily," he breathed. Her eyes widened. "Jonathan?" He hadn't seen her in 10 years. Not since that conference. Not since one incredible night. Not since she vanished without a word. She looked thinner, weaker, but still, unmistakably, her. "I didn't know," he said, voice shaking. "I didn't even know you left the company." She looked down. "I had to." Tyler stood between them, glancing back and forth. "You know each other?" Jonathan didn't answer. He was still staring at Emily. And she was looking at the watch in his hand. Her voice broke as she said, "You kept it." He nodded. "I lost it, 10 years ago." She smiled, bittersweet. "No, you didn't. I found it in your jacket pocket the morning you left. I was going to return it. But then... Her eyes shimmered. Life happened. Jonathan stepped closer. "Are they mine?" Emily hesitated, then looked at her son. "I think you already know the answer." The watch ticked softly between them. Time, it seemed, had never really stopped. Jonathan stood frozen in the center of the small apartment. The air felt thick, almost too heavy to breathe. The ticking of the old watch in his palm filled the silence like a heartbeat from another lifetime. Emily looked older than he remembered, but still beautiful in a quiet, worn way. Her eyes held stories, regrets, and unspoken strength. Tyler had taken a seat near the window, fidgeting with the frayed strap of his shoeshine kit, watching the exchange with growing curiosity. Jonathan finally found his voice. "I searched for you," he said softly. "After that night. I asked around, but you were gone." Emily gave a weak smile, one corner of her mouth lifting slightly. "They let me go the next week. Said it was a downsizing, but I knew why." His brows furrowed. "Why?" "There were rumors," she said, "about us, about that night in Miami. I didn't want to bring shame on you, or the company. I figured disappearing was the cleanest way." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You didn't even tell me you were pregnant." "I tried," Emily whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "I wrote. I called. But your assistant, what was her name? Marcia. She never let anything through." Jonathan's eyes dimmed. "Marcia retired 4 years ago. She never told me." "I figured as much." The tension between them was thick, but it wasn't angry. It was sad. Heavy with all the time they'd lost. Jonathan looked over at Tyler. "And his brother?" "Noah," she said, her smile softening. "He's upstairs with a neighbor's kid. They're working on a school project." He glanced around the apartment. Cracks in the ceiling, secondhand furniture, a heating unit that buzzed. Then he looked back at Emily. "You've been doing this alone? For 10 years?" She nodded, a tear slipping quietly down her cheek. "I worked 3 jobs when they were little. I've done what I could, but lately, my it's been harder." Jonathan moved instinctively to the edge of the couch. "What's going on?" She hesitated. Then, carefully, "Congenital heart valve defect. It's genetic. Runs in my dad's side. Some days I'm okay. Others, I can't breathe." The words hit him like a freight train. "And the boys? They're healthy, for now, but we need to keep checking. just in case." Jonathan's voice wavered. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" She looked at him, long and hard. "Because you were already a world away. And I was terrified that bringing you into this would make things worse. I didn't want to be the woman who ruined your life." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't ruin anything. You gave me sons I never knew I had." There was a long pause. Then, from the doorway, a new voice piped up. "Mom!" They both turned. A boy stood there, smaller than Tyler, but with the same dark eyes. He clutched a folder to his chest and looked between the two adults cautiously. "That's him," Emily whispered. "That's Noah." Jonathan rose to his feet. "Hi there," he said gently. "I'm a friend of your mom's." Noah narrowed his eyes slightly. "You look like me." Jonathan smiled, touched, stunned. "I was just thinking the same." Emily stood and wrapped an arm around Noah's shoulder. "Why don't you go help your brother unpack his school things?" Noah nodded, his gaze lingering a second longer on Jonathan before walking off. Once they were alone again, Jonathan lowered his voice. "I want to help, Emily. Not just with money or food or medicine. I want to be in their lives." Her shoulders sank. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," he said firmly. "They're my sons. And you were more than a one-night memory. You mattered." Her eyes welled up again. "I don't want to be a charity case." "You're not," he said. "You're family." There was silence. Then Emily looked at him, cautiously hopeful. "What are you offering, exactly?" Jonathan leaned forward. "Let me get you the medical care you need. Let me support the boys. And maybe, just maybe, we can figure out what all this means. Together." Emily stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly. "Okay." Outside, the winter sun slipped lower behind the Boston skyline. But inside that worn-down apartment, something long buried had begun to thaw. Hope. The next morning, Jonathan stood on the sidewalk outside Emily's apartment building, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. Snow flurries drifted through the cold Boston air, melting instantly against the heat of his thoughts. He had barely slept. The faces of Tyler and Noah lingered in his mind, echoes of himself as a boy. The jawlines, the way Noah furrowed his brows, the curious way Tyler had tilted his head when he handed over that rusted watch. There was no doubt in his heart anymore. These boys weren't just hers. They were his. He buzzed the intercom. A few moments later, the door creaked open. Emily stood there, hair damp, a thick scarf wrapped around her neck. "You came back?" she said quietly. "I said I would." Inside, the boys were watching cartoons, their laughter like small bursts of light in the modest apartment. "I want to take you all somewhere," Jonathan said, looking at her. "If that's okay." She hesitated. "Where?" "Somewhere that might help us all understand the truth." A few hours later, they stood at the Boston Gene Center. Jonathan had arranged everything. No cameras, no press, just a private DNA test and a long conversation with the pediatric specialist. Emily was hesitant, but agreed. While they waited for the results, Jonathan took the boys for hot chocolate. The cafe was cozy, tucked into a brick-lined corner near the hospital. Tyler ordered a double marshmallow swirl. Noah got his with a cinnamon stick, just like Jonathan used to as a boy. "So," Tyler asked, blowing on his drink, "how do you know Mom?" Jonathan smiled gently. "We met a long time ago, back before you two were born." "Were you friends?" Noah asked. "We were more than that, for a short time," he replied. "But then, life got in the way." The boys looked at each other, clearly absorbing more than their years should have demanded. "I found that watch in a donation box," Tyler said. "The box had your initials, JP, but it was old. I figured it was junk, but Mom cried when she saw it." Jonathan blinked. Where was the donation box? Downtown, Tyler said. A place called Second-Hand Grace. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. That was the shelter his company's foundation had donated inventory to last quarter. Old clothes, books, and a few forgotten things from his past that had ended up in storage. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was something more, a thread of fate winding its way home. Later that afternoon, they returned to the clinic. Emily sat in the hallway, fingers nervously twisting the edge of her coat. Jonathan sat beside her, saying nothing, but his presence was steady, like a promise. The nurse emerged with an envelope. "Results are in," she said. "It's conclusive." Emily took a deep breath. Jonathan opened the envelope. Father. Positive match. He let out a soft exhale, then looked at her. "They're mine." She nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "I always knew," she said, "but now it's real." They walked home in the silence, but the boys sensed something had changed. That evening, after dinner, Jonathan sat on the floor with them while Emily rested on the couch. Tyler placed the watch back into Jonathan's hand. "I guess it really does belong to you." Jonathan looked down at it, then handed it back. "No," he said warmly, "it belongs to all of us now." Noah leaned against him, tired but curious. "Are you going to be around more?" Jonathan nodded slowly. "Yeah, if you'll have me." The boy's head dropped gently onto his shoulder. Emily watched from the other side of the room. Her heart was torn between fear and relief. She had carried everything for so long, but now, for the first time in years, someone else was stepping in, not to take over, but to stand beside her. Later that night, Jonathan walked out into the hallway, his phone to his ear. "Ben, I need you to dig into an incident from 10 years ago. Look into who forced Emily out of our internship program. I want names, emails, everything." His lawyer, sharp and efficient, didn't ask questions. "You got it," Ben replied. Jonathan looked back toward the apartment door. He was no longer just a CEO with a busy schedule and an empty condo. He was a father, and now he had time to make up for. Not just with money, with presence, with truth, with love. 2 days after the DNA results, Jonathan sat in his private office overlooking the frozen Charles River. He wasn't thinking about quarterly earnings or the upcoming board meeting. His mind was fixed on a name, Emily Grace Weller, and the question that refused to leave him. Who took her future away? A soft knock pulled him from thought. Ben stepped in, holding a folder. "I found something," he said. "It's worse than we thought." Jonathan gestured for him to continue. "She was a part of the summer leadership intern program. Top 2% of her class. Stellar reviews. But right after she submitted her final paper, a memo from Charles Denton flagged her for conduct unbecoming." Jonathan's jaw tensed. Denton? He was head of compliance back then. Ben nodded. He claimed she had an inappropriate relationship with a superior, though no names were attached. The file was sealed. She was quietly let go. No inquiry, no exit interview. Just a whisper campaign that followed her out the door. Jonathan stood, walking slowly toward the window. "That was the same month I went on that Florida retreat." Ben nodded again. "If you were the superior, someone must have wanted to make it disappear." Jonathan turned back. They didn't just erase her internship. They stole her chance to build something, to provide for those boys. Ben's voice softened. "What do you want to do?" Jonathan looked out over the city, then down at the watch on his wrist, the one Tyler had returned, now polished and ticking again. "Make it right." That afternoon, Jonathan returned to Emily's apartment. Tyler opened the door, wearing a crooked bow tie and a wide grin. "Mom said I could wear it since it's a special dinner," he explained proudly. Jonathan chuckled. "You look sharp, buddy." Inside, Emily was setting the table, moving slowly. She glanced up, smiling, but he could see the fatigue in her eyes. "You okay?" he asked gently. "Just a long day," she said, brushing it off. "You didn't have to bring dinner." "I didn't," he said with a smile. "I brought all of you somewhere instead." Confused, Emily followed him outside, where a sleek black car waited. A chauffeur held the door open. The boys gasped. "Are we going to a castle?" Noah asked. "Something like that." Jonathan winked. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the Crescent, a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. The place was empty. Jonathan had reserved it for the night. Candles flickered softly. String lights glowed overhead. Snow danced in the air around them. Emily hesitated. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," he said simply. "You deserve at least one night that feels like the world sees you." They sat beneath the stars. Laughter warmed the table. For the first time, Emily shared stories from her college years, how she dreamed of working in finance, how she used to write scholarship essays late into the night with the boys asleep beside her. Jonathan listened, deeply moved. He could see her spirit, resilient, brilliant, undimmed by the unfairness life had thrown at her. After dessert, he handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Redemption," he said softly. Inside was a formal letter from his company, a full public apology, and a second offer, an executive mentorship program, complete with flexible hours, childcare support, and healthcare coverage. Emily blinked hard. "Why would you—" "Because they took your voice," he said, "and I want to help give it back." She looked down, trying to speak, but no words came, just tears, soft, silent, honest. "I can't promise I'll say yes," she whispered. "You don't have to," Jonathan replied. "This isn't a favor. It's a beginning, if you want it." Noah leaned into her side, sleepy. Tyler yawned, resting his head against Jonathan's arm. For a moment, the rooftop felt like a sanctuary, a place where old wounds didn't hurt so loudly, where something new might grow. Later that night, as he helped tuck the boys into bed, Jonathan paused at the door. "Hey," Emily called softly. He turned. "I never stopped wondering what would have happened if you'd known." "I know now," he said, voice steady, "and I'm here." Outside, the snow continued to fall, quietly covering the city with a soft, forgiving blanket. And, for the first time in a long time, Emily let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry it all alone. The next morning, Emily sat on the worn edge of her couch, the letter from Jonathan's company still resting on her lap. Her fingers brushed over the embossed logo. She hadn't held anything like this in years, something that felt like possibility, not rejection. She glanced across the room. Tyler and Noah were arguing about cereal again, their laughter spilling into the air like sunlight through cracked blinds. Life had taught her not to hope too hard, but this time the ache in her chest wasn't from fear, it was from something unfamiliar, relief. Just as she was about to set the letter aside, her phone buzzed, Jonathan Pierce. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Good morning." "Morning," he replied warmly. "How are the boys?" "Trying to pour milk without supervision. So, dangerous." He chuckled. "I was wondering if I could stop by for a bit, just to talk." She paused, then nodded. "Sure, they'll like that." An hour later, Jonathan arrived holding a small box. Tyler and Noah tackled him at the door with pure, joyful energy. "Did you bring more food?" Tyler asked hopefully. Jonathan laughed. "Not this time, but I did bring something." He handed the box to Emily, who opened it carefully. Inside was the same watch Tyler had returned, but now it gleamed, polished and ticking again, its leather strap replaced with new stitching. I had it restored, Jonathan said quietly. Thought maybe it should stay with the people who found it. Emily blinked back a wave of emotion. It belonged to your father, didn't it? He nodded. Yeah. He gave it to me the day I started at the company. Said, time doesn't wait, so don't waste it. I lost it during that retreat. Never thought I'd see it again. Tyler beamed. So, it really is lucky. Jonathan smiled at him, then looked back at Emily. And maybe it's telling me something. She tilted her head gently. Like what? That I lost more than a watch that day, and maybe it's time I stop running from the things that matter. They sat across from each other on the couch, the boys playing nearby, stacking blocks and humming their favorite superhero theme. The quiet stretched between them, not awkward, but weighted with things still unsaid. Why didn't you come find me? Jonathan asked softly. Emily let out a breath. I tried. I emailed, called your office. I even left a letter with the front desk, but your assistant said you were traveling non-stop. By the time I found out I was pregnant, I figured you had moved on. I didn't, he said. I buried myself in work because I didn't know what else to do, and I never knew. Her eyes shimmered. They're good boys. I did my best. He nodded, his voice low. You did more than your best. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows. Inside, something fragile began to shift. That evening, Jonathan took the boys to a small music shop downtown. The walls were lined with keyboards, guitars, violins, each one humming with possibility. Pick something, he told them. Noah's eyes widened. Anything? Anything, Jonathan said. Music was my escape when I was your age. Maybe it can be yours too. Tyler made a beeline for the drums, tapping rhythmically. Noah hesitated before settling on a second-hand guitar, its wood faded but still beautiful. As they checked out, the clerk glanced at Jonathan. Starting them young, huh? Jonathan smiled. Starting them right. Back at the apartment, Emily sat with her tea, watching the boys unwrap their new instruments like it was Christmas. When Jonathan stood to leave, she walked him to the door. Thank you, she said quietly. Not just for the gifts, for being here. He looked at her with eyes that had seen boardrooms, cities, battles of numbers and egos, but none of it had ever mattered like this. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I can't promise I'll always get it right, but I can promise I'll try. For them. For you. Her lips parted, but no reply came. Not yet. But as he stepped out into the cold evening air, she watched him go with something she hadn't felt in a very long time, hope. And just inside the door, two little boys sat cross-legged on the floor, strumming and drumming out a rhythm neither of them knew would become the heartbeat of a new beginning. Jonathan sat in his car that night, parked just outside his penthouse, watching the city lights shimmer like distant stars. But he didn't go in, not yet. Instead, he stared at the old watch on his wrist. The same watch that had been handed to him by his father. The same one he'd worn the day he first met Emily, 10 years ago, in a crowded hotel conference room in Tampa, when she'd been an intern too shy to ask a question during the Q&A. He remembered how her eyes lit up when he encouraged her to speak. He remembered the laughter, the long conversation over coffee, the night on the beach afterward. Back then, it had felt like something real, but life had a way of pulling people apart when ambition whispered louder than love. He pressed his palm to the leather band and closed his eyes. The next day, he returned to the office only to be greeted by his executive assistant, Brenda, who looked more tense than usual. You have a board meeting at 10, she said flatly, and a reporter from Boston Ledger left another voicemail. They say there's a rumor going around. Jonathan raised a brow. What kind of rumor? Brenda looked hesitant. That you've reconnected with someone, a woman who used to intern here, that you might have a child. The words sliced through the air. Jonathan didn't flinch. Tell legal to prepare a statement, but don't deny it. Brenda blinked. Sir? He met her eyes. I'm not ashamed of the truth. Later that afternoon, Jonathan sat across from Harold Knox, a longtime board member who had known his father. Harold's voice was firm, but not unkind. You're walking a thin line, Jonathan. There are shareholders asking if you're distracted, if you're making decisions with your heart, not your head. Jonathan nodded slowly. Maybe I am. Harold sighed. And the woman, Emily Monroe, there were complications when she left. Jonathan leaned forward. She was forced out, blacklisted by people in this building who thought she was climbing too fast, and I didn't stop it. Harold studied him. You never mentioned that before. I didn't know the whole story, but I do now. And what do you intend to do? Jonathan spoke softly, but with certainty. Make it right. That evening, he visited Emily again. This time, not to talk about the past, but the future. The twins ran to greet him, holding up sheet music they'd started writing. Their joy was contagious. But Emily sat quietly at the kitchen table, her expression unreadable. Emily, he began, I need to tell you something. She looked up, cautiously. What is it? I know why you left the company. I dug through the old HR records. You were set up by someone who felt threatened. She exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. It was humiliating. 1 minute I was presenting at a team meeting. The next, I was accused of things I didn't even understand. No hearing, no support, just silence. Jonathan nodded slowly, and I was part of that silence. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. This is a formal apology and a settlement package, retroactive compensation, benefits, a letter clearing your name. Emily's hands trembled as she took it. Why now? Because it should have happened 10 years ago, and because our boys deserve to see what accountability looks like. She stared at him, tears pooling. Jonathan. This changes things. He gently touched her hand. I hope it does. That night, after the boys went to bed, they sat on the porch together, a chill in the air, silence between them, but not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that says everything already. I never wanted to be a scandal, Emily murmured. You're not, he said softly. You're the truth I should have held on to. She turned to him, eyes searching. What about the company? I'll weather the headlines, but I won't walk away from this. From you, from them. He hesitated, then added, I'd like to move you somewhere safer. Better schools, better doctors. I want to be part of their lives, not just a visitor. Emily nodded slowly, the wall around her beginning to fall. Let's take it one day at a time. Jonathan smiled gently. That's all I'm asking. As he walked back to his car that night, the city no longer felt cold. His past had caught up with him, but instead of burying him, it was guiding him toward redemption, toward fatherhood, toward something deeper than power or position. And on his wrist, the old watch ticked softly, not counting down, but beginning again. The next morning brought a quiet kind of peace. The sky was overcast, casting a soft, silvery light through the windows of Emily's apartment. The boys were still asleep, their breathing steady beneath blankets that barely covered their growing legs. Jonathan sat at the kitchen table, stirring cream into a cup of coffee that had gone cold minutes ago. Across from him, Emily wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, her fingers tracing the rim of a chipped mug. You look like you haven't slept, she said gently. He glanced up, offering a tired smile. I didn't. Too many thoughts. Too much history. She nodded, eyes fixed on her hands. I've lived like that for years. It never really gets easier. There was a pause. Then Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking," he began, "about legacy, about the kind of man I want to be remembered as, not just by the public, but by them, Leo and Micah." Emily looked at him, her voice quiet but firm. "Then be present. That's all they really want. Not gifts, not speeches, just you," he nodded slowly. "Then I will be, as often as you'll let me." Before Emily could respond, a sleepy voice called from the hallway. "Mom, is he still here?" It was Leo, rubbing his eyes, dragging a blanket behind him like a cape. Micah trailed behind, clinging to a stuffed elephant with one ear missing. "I'm still here," Jonathan said, standing and opening his arms, "and I'm not going anywhere." The boys ran to him, arms wrapped tightly around his legs, laughter tumbling out like music. Emily watched the scene quietly, something flickering behind her eyes, hope, maybe, or relief. Later that day, Jonathan took them to a nearby park. The kind with worn swings and a creaky carousel. It wasn't extravagant, but the boys loved it. While they played, Emily sat on a bench beside him. "Do you remember that night in Tampa?" she asked, almost wistfully. He turned, caught off guard. "Of course I do. You told me your father used to bring you to places like this, said they reminded him that no amount of money could buy laughter." Jonathan chuckled softly. "He was right, and he gave me that watch the next day." She looked at him. "Do you think he would have liked them? The boys?" He smiled, eyes never leaving the children. "He would have loved them." A quiet moment passed. Wind rustled through the trees. Then Emily spoke again. "I have something for you." From her purse, she pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time. Carefully, she handed it to him. Jonathan opened it and stared. It was a photograph, grainy and faded, but unmistakable. He and Emily, smiling on the beach, the watch clearly visible on his wrist. And, in the corner, written in Emily's handwriting, "The night we lost track of time." He exhaled slowly, emotion rising in his chest. "I thought I lost everything from that trip." "You didn't," she said softly. "You just forgot where to look." That night, after the boys were tucked into bed and the apartment had gone still, Jonathan stood on the balcony, staring out at the city. Emily joined him quietly, a blanket around her shoulders. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Walking away back then?" He turned to her. "Every single day." She looked down. "We can't change the past." "No," he agreed, "but we can shape what comes next." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Inside, the old watch ticked softly on the kitchen counter, its hands moving forward minute by minute. A quiet reminder that time lost can still be honored, and sometimes, if you're lucky, healed. Monday morning came with a chill in the air, but Jonathan felt something else, something warmer. He had spent the weekend with the twins and Emily, feeling a part of something that went far beyond his corporate world. It wasn't just about righting a wrong. It was about becoming the man he had buried under years of business deals and boardroom decisions. As he entered the headquarters of Pierce Financial, the doorman gave him a curious glance. Whispers seemed to follow him down the corridor. People smiled politely, but their eyes lingered a second too long. Something was off. When he reached his office, his assistant, Cheryl, looked up from her desk with visible concern. "There was a message for you," she said, hesitating. "From the board." Jonathan's brow furrowed. "The board? They've called for a closed-door meeting, noon, no agenda given." He exhaled slowly. "Thanks, Cheryl." By noon, he was seated at the long table in the executive suite, surrounded by sharply dressed men and women. The atmosphere was colder than usual. Lawrence Trent, the acting chairman, cleared his throat. "Jonathan, we've received some troubling information." Jonathan leaned forward, calm but alert. "I see. Let's talk about it." Trent folded his hands. An anonymous report claims you've been engaging in personal entanglements that compromise the firm's image. There are questions about a woman and twin boys. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Are you seriously calling a family reunion a scandal? We're not judging your personal life, another board member added quickly, but there are questions of paternity, inheritance rumors, and potential conflicts of interest. Jonathan stood slowly. Let me be clear. The only thing I'm guilty of is being absent for too long, and now trying to do what's right. Trent's voice sharpened. Still, these developments require due diligence. Until further notice, we're suspending your operational duties. Jonathan froze. Another member chimed in awkwardly. Just until things settle. It's procedural. Jonathan nodded once, jaw clenched. Understood. He walked out without another word. Later that evening, he sat in his car outside Emily's building, staring at the dashboard. His hand hovered over the steering wheel, unmoving. When he finally entered, the boys ran up to him, full of stories about school and playground games, but he couldn't fake a smile. Emily caught it immediately. What happened? They're pushing me out, he said softly. Temporarily, they claim, but we both know what that means. She sat down beside him. Because of us? He shook his head. Because of fear. Because people would rather protect a polished image than support something real. She looked away, voice tight. Maybe I shouldn't have let them know who I was. Maybe I made things worse. No, he said firmly. You didn't do anything wrong, and neither did they. She took his hand gently. Then fight. Not with anger, with truth. Jonathan looked at her, this woman who had been hurt, silenced, ignored, and still she spoke with strength. I will, he said quietly, but not for my company, for this family. That night, Jonathan opened his laptop and started writing. Not a press release, not a legal statement. A letter to every employee, every board member, every person who had ever believed in Pierce Financial. He poured his heart into it, spoke of responsibility, of choices, of discovering something far more valuable than wealth. Family. He ended with a photo, the one Emily had given him, the beach, the smile, the watch, and the caption, Time reveals what the heart never forgets. As he hit send, he whispered to himself, Let them judge, but let them see me too. Emily stood behind him, quiet. They will, she said gently. They'll see who you really are. And for the first time in years, Jonathan felt no fear, just truth and love. The day of the hearing arrived with a quiet tension in the air. The mahogany-paneled courtroom wasn't packed, but the weight of every glance, every whisper, was enough to make it feel like the whole world was watching. At the center sat Jonathan Pierce, no longer the untouchable CEO in an ironed suit, but a man with something far more fragile at stake. Family. Emily sat beside him, her face pale but composed. Tyler and Liam were in the hallway, with a court-appointed advocate keeping them company. Jonathan had insisted they not be present for the more intense proceedings. A balding judge adjusted his glasses and scanned the folder in front of him. This case regards the petition for legal guardianship and verification of paternity involving Mr. Jonathan Pierce, he began. Mr. Pierce, do you understand the implications of this request? Jonathan rose. Yes, Your Honor, I do. The judge gave a short nod. And you claim to be the biological father of Tyler and Liam Pierce? I do, and I am ready to take full responsibility for them. A murmur swept across the rows behind him. Journalists, old colleagues, even former board members who had come to witness what they believed was the fall of an empire. But Jonathan didn't flinch. The opposing counsel stood, a young man in an expensive suit. Your Honor, while we don't question Mr. Pierce's sincerity, we raise concerns regarding Ms. Emily Carter's intentions. This sudden reappearance years after a supposed romantic encounter aligns suspiciously with Mr. Pierce's recent increase in media exposure. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Emily remained still. The attorney continued. We also have reason to believe Ms. Carter may have been compensated for her silence, or is now leveraging her children's potential connection for financial gain. That was the moment Emily broke. I never asked for money, she said, voice trembling but loud enough to stop the room. I never even asked him to show up. My boys found his watch and he came looking for the truth. The judge raised his hand. Ms. Carter, you'll have a chance to speak fully, but please wait until called. She nodded, swallowing hard. The DNA test results were then read into record. 99.8% probability of paternity. Jonathan finally exhaled. It wasn't that he doubted, but seeing it in black and white made something in him settle, like the final puzzle piece had clicked into place. I don't care about my reputation, he said to the judge. I care about those boys growing up knowing they were never unwanted. I missed the first 10 years. I won't miss another day. The judge leaned back, hands clasped. And, Ms. Carter, do you support this guardianship arrangement? Emily stood slowly. I do, but not because I need help raising them. I've raised them on my own this far. I support it because they deserve a father, and because I trust him. Her voice cracked on that last part. Silence filled the room. Then a voice from the hallway, small, curious. Mom! Tyler peeked through the door. Behind him, Liam followed. I'm sorry, the advocate whispered. They insisted. The judge motioned gently. Let them in. The boys walked forward, hand in hand. Tyler looked at the judge, then at Jonathan. Is it true? He asked. He's really our dad? Jonathan knelt slowly, tears brimming. Yes, I am. Liam stepped forward too. Can we still live with Mom? Jonathan smiled through the ache in his chest. You'll always be with your mom. I just hope I can be a part of that life too. The judge cleared his throat. In light of the evidence, the testimony, and the children's well-being, I grant shared custody, with full guardianship privileges to Mr. Pierce under regular review. Gasps, a few scattered claps. One journalist even wiped a tear. As they exited the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Flashbulbs, questions, noise. Jonathan wrapped his arms protectively around the twins. Emily took his hand. They walked together, a united front against a world that had once tried to keep them apart. Back at Emily's apartment, the air felt lighter. Tyler played with the repaired watch on the coffee table. Liam doodled song lyrics in his notebook. Jonathan stood at the window, watching the city that had once felt so distant, so cold. Emily joined him. You okay? He nodded, for the first time. Yeah. She smiled, her voice soft. You're not just their father now. Jonathan turned. No, I'm theirs. Entirely. And in that small, rented apartment, something unshakable had been built, one heartbeat at a time. The rain fell in sheets that night, drumming against the windows like a restless heart. Inside the apartment, though, there was warmth. Not from the heater humming in the corner, but from something much deeper. It was the sound of laughter, the low murmur of bedtime stories, the quiet hush of a family finding its rhythm. Jonathan sat cross-legged on the living room floor, watching Tyler and Liam build a paper rocket ship with duct tape and cereal boxes. He'd just returned from a full day at the firm, but his tie was off, and his phone had been left at the door. He was here. Fully, and that was new. Emily moved about the kitchen, her steps a little slower these days, but her spirit steadier. Ever since the hearing, she'd walked with more certainty, like a woman finally standing on ground that wouldn't give way. I was thinking, she said, sliding a bowl of popcorn onto the table, Maybe it's time to get a place that fits all of us." Jonathan looked up, surprised but moved. "Are you sure?" She met his gaze. "I think I've always been sure. I was just afraid." He stood and crossed to her, gently placing a hand over hers. "You're not alone anymore. We're doing this together." Before Emily could reply, a loud knock rattled the door. Not just a knock, an urgent, angry pounding. Jonathan instinctively stepped forward, placing himself between the door and the boys. Emily opened it cautiously. On the other side stood Gerald Banks, the former senior executive who'd once spearheaded the false rumors that forced Emily out 10 years ago. His suit was immaculate. His smile was venomous. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Jonathan stiffened. "Gerald, you're not welcome here." Gerald chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You think you can just stroll back into the company, parade your little redemption story, and not expect consequences?" Emily frowned. "What is he talking about?" Jonathan sighed. "He's trying to scare us. The board is split. Some want me reinstated after the hearing. Others, like Gerald, want to bury me." Gerald stepped forward. "You humiliated us, turning a custody case into a press conference, leaking your noble story to the media. You think that earns you respect?" Jonathan clenched his fists, but his voice was calm. "I didn't leak anything, and I'm not chasing respect. I'm choosing my family." Gerald's smile faded. "Then enjoy them, while you still can." With that, he turned and vanished down the stairwell, the echo of his threats lingering like a cold draft. Emily closed the door, her hands trembling. What was that supposed to mean? Jonathan exhaled slowly. "He's bluffing, but I'll talk to my legal team tomorrow, just in case." Later that night, after the boys had drifted off to sleep, Jonathan sat by the window, staring into the storm. Emily joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You ever think it's too late?" she asked softly. He turned to her. "Too late for what?" "For all of this. For us." Jonathan reached into his pocket and pulled out the old watch. The one that started it all. He held it out between them. "I lost this 10 years ago. Thought it was gone forever. Thought time had taken something I could never get back. But then Tyler handed it to me. And I realized, love waits. Even when we think it's too late." Emily blinked, her voice barely a whisper. "You sound like someone who believes in second chances." He smiled gently. "I do now." Outside, the rain finally began to ease, like the sky itself was letting go of something heavy. And inside, two people sat shoulder to shoulder, no longer running from the past, but ready to build something new from it. The next morning came too fast, sunlight slipping through the curtains like a quiet warning. Jonathan hadn't slept. Not really. He'd spent most of the night sitting by the boys' bedroom door, listening to their soft breathing. Every so often he reached into his pocket to feel the weight of the old watch. It grounded him, reminded him why he couldn't back down now. Downstairs, Emily was already on the phone with the clinic, checking on her upcoming appointment. The boys were getting dressed for school. Tyler was humming, Liam still sleepy-eyed, dragging his backpack across the floor. Jonathan made pancakes. His version wasn't as fluffy as Emily's, but the boys didn't care. They were just happy he was there. Really there. Halfway through breakfast, Jonathan's phone buzzed. He almost didn't check it, but the screen flashed red with urgency. A message from his legal counsel. "Board meeting moved up. 10 a.m. today. Emergency vote. Be ready." Jonathan looked up from the table. "I need to head out soon," he said quietly. Emily met his eyes. "Is this about Gerald?" He nodded. "They're going to try to vote me out for good. Paint everything as a publicity stunt. Say I used the kids to manipulate public opinion." Tyler froze mid-bite. "Are we in trouble?" Jonathan crouched beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "No, son, you're not in trouble. I'm just going to make sure the people who lied don't get to keep running things." Emily stood, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Do you want me to come?" He smiled gently. "No. Stay with the boys. I'll be back." By the time he walked into the firm's headquarters, the tension was thick. Cameras were parked out front. Reporters murmured as he passed. Inside, the boardroom felt colder than usual. Polished wood, polished smiles. But, underneath, a storm waited. Gerald stood at the head of the table, confident as ever. "Jonathan, so glad you could join us." Jonathan took his seat without flinching. "Let's get on with it." The chairman cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the motion to permanently remove Jonathan Pierce as CEO, effective immediately." "On what grounds?" Jonathan asked. Gerald smirked. "On grounds of using company resources to support personal affairs, blurring lines between private drama and corporate image, and damaging investor trust." Jonathan stood slowly. "Let me ask you something. 10 years ago, when you pushed Emily out over an unfounded rumor, did any of you investigate? Did any of you speak to her directly?" Silence. He continued, voice steady but sharp. "You ruined a woman's life. You made sure she couldn't speak up. And now, because the truth came out, because I chose to take responsibility, you call that damage control?" One of the younger board members shifted uncomfortably. "Jonathan, this isn't about the past." "But it is," Jonathan said, firmly. "Because this company doesn't just trade in numbers. It trades in values. And if we're so afraid of the truth that we punish people for living it, then maybe I should walk away." Gasps fluttered around the room. Gerald's jaw clenched. "I didn't come here today to beg," Jonathan added. "I came here to offer clarity. I'm stepping down, not because you forced me to, but because my sons need a father more than this company needs another press release." With that, he placed his resignation letter on the table. "I'll recommend a transition plan that honors every employee, but I won't be part of a culture that punishes integrity." He turned and walked out, leaving the room stunned. Outside, the press swarmed him. Questions flew like arrows. "Mr. Pierce, are you resigning permanently? Did family influence your decision? What happens now?" He paused only once, looking into the camera. "What happens now? I go home. To my kids." That night, the apartment was quieter than usual. The boys were asleep early. Emily curled up beside Jonathan on the couch, blanket pulled over both their laps. "You did it," she whispered. He stared at the ceiling. "I don't know if I won or lost." She smiled softly. "You chose love. That's always a win." Outside, the city lights blinked gently, like stars trying to break through the fog. And for the first time in a decade, Jonathan Pierce felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Jonathan stood by the window, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the early morning light stretch over the city skyline. A familiar hum of traffic moved below, but inside the apartment, all was still, peaceful, unhurried. Emily stirred on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her hair soft against the pillow. Across the hall, the boys were still asleep. Tyler had insisted on keeping the watch on his nightstand close to the lamp. Liam had fallen asleep holding a photo of the four of them, taken just yesterday in the park. Jonathan smiled faintly. It had only been a few days since he walked away from the boardroom, but already his world had changed. The noise of corporate life had faded. What remained was something far quieter and far more powerful. Later that morning, he found Emily at the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of medical bills and insurance forms. "Don't," he said gently, taking a seat across from her. She looked up. "We can't pretend it's not real." He reached over and laced his fingers with hers. "We're not pretending. We're preparing. Together." She exhaled, shaky and slow. I just I don't want to be a burden." Jonathan shook his head. "You're not. You're the reason I found my way back. You and those boys. You're my compass." A few hours later, the family stood outside the courthouse. The hearing to finalize guardianship had been scheduled earlier than expected, thanks to a quiet push from an old friend in the system. Jonathan had made sure everything was in place: financial records, character references, proof of paternity. Inside, the boys sat nervously between their parents. Tyler leaned against Emily, while Liam clung to Jonathan's sleeve. The judge, a kind-eyed woman with silver hair, reviewed the documents carefully. "You've taken quite a step, Mr. Pierce," she said, looking over her glasses. "I took too long," he replied quietly. "But I'm here now, for good." The judge nodded. "That matters, more than you know." She turned to Emily. "And you're comfortable with joint guardianship?" Emily smiled softly. "I've never trusted anyone more." There was a long pause before the judge finally said, "Then it's official. The court recognizes Jonathan Pierce as the legal father and co-guardian of Tyler and Liam Pierce." The boys broke into quiet grins. Tyler whispered, "So, we're a real family now?" Jonathan pulled them close. "We always were. Now it's just written down." That evening, the apartment filled with laughter, music, and something else: belonging. Liam played a melody on the small keyboard Jonathan had surprised them with. Emily hummed along, folding laundry beside the window. Tyler was at the coffee table, sketching what looked like a new family portrait, complete with a golden watch drawn in the center. After dinner, Jonathan stood beside the boys' bedroom door, watching them get ready for bed. "Dad," Tyler said suddenly, "can we fix the watch?" Jonathan tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "It still ticks, but it's cracked. Maybe we could take it somewhere, get it cleaned up?" He smiled. "Yeah, we'll do that this weekend." Liam sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Can we put it in a frame after, so it won't get lost again?" Jonathan paused, then slowly nodded. "We'll find the right one." The next morning, they did just that. A quiet shop tucked into a corner of the city, run by a man who barely spoke but handled the watch like it was sacred. He replaced the glass, cleaned the gears, polished the band until it gleamed. When he handed it back, Jonathan stared at it for a long time, the inscription still clear. "To my son, JP Sr., he," clutched it to his chest. Back home, they placed the watch in a wooden shadow box, along with a new photo of the family: Jonathan, Emily, Tyler, and Liam. Below the frame, Emily had written a line in silver ink: "Time doesn't come back, but love can." It hung above the entryway, the first thing anyone saw when they stepped inside. And as the weeks turned into months and seasons began to change, one thing remained constant. They faced everything: Emily's treatments, school concerts, messy dinners, hard days, with love, with each other. Because what had been lost had finally been found. And this time, it wasn't going anywhere.